Recently, we've seen some pretty big NHL trades involving Timothy Liljegren getting shipped off to the San Jose Sharks, Olli Maatta going to the Utah Hockey Club, but the NHL is not close to done. Over the next few months, as we gear up for the NHL Trade Deadline, there's going to be a lot of teams out there down in the dumps looking to change their ways, and teams up at the top looking to get even stronger. That will really change the landscape of the NHL. So who do I see as the most likely players to get dealt? Well, make sure you watch till the end because it could involve your favorite NHL team, and hit that subscribe button if you're new for more trade rumor content just like this as we lead up to the trade deadline next year. And of course, it's presented by BetUS, who are also the sponsors of today's video. If you guys use code YouTube150 when you sign up, you'll get a 150% sign-up bonus on your first deposit and 125% sign-up bonus on your next two deposits after that. You, of course, can go through every NHL game. Right now, the only games as I'm recording this are the Kings, Preds, Devils, Oilers. We can also go through the divisional odds for each division, the Stanley Cup winners, and then also something that's been released recently is the NCAA Hockey Championship winner odds. You got Boston College right now with the best odds at plus 450, but if you're feeling any team, maybe your hometown team, you can go for them as well in the odds. They got a lot of different options, all the way down to Armia Brown right at the very bottom. So a lot of options there, and BetUS is the best place to make your picks throughout the whole hockey season. And thank you to BetUS for sponsoring today's video. Now, like we mentioned before, we've already seen a couple of trades over the last month as teams look to change their situations. We saw the first one where Utah had major injuries to their defense in Jersey and Marino. They went after Olli Maatta from the Detroit Red Wings, and we see a third-round pick exchanged. And then we also had the Timothy Liljegren trade where he was shipped off to Toronto in exchange for Matt Benning, a third-round pick and a sixth-round pick, which has felt like a long time coming. Liljegren has felt like he's always been in rumors, and especially with his poor start to the season with the Leafs, it felt pretty inevitable. But we've seen the market have a little bit of consistency so far, where both defensemen have had a third-round pick at least going in exchange. In Liljegren's case, with him being younger and having seemingly more potential than Maatta, you have Benning and a sixth-round pick as well coming on top of that. But we can get a sense of what GMs are asking for around the league, though it seems like at this point still, trades are few and far between. It makes sense though, right? At the start of the season, there's a lot more teams out there that think they have a chance for the playoffs. I mean, even a team like the San Jose Sharks, who would pretty naturally be selling in most situations, they're going out and acquiring players like Timothy Liljegren, which I think is the correct move for them. So it makes the trade landscape a lot more unpredictable, but today I tried to predict it as best as I possibly could. Now, this list isn't in any particular order or anything besides number one, and the first player we're going to talk about, because to me, I think he is the most likely player to get dealt over the next couple months, and that is going on to the Utah Hockey Club in Michael Carcone. Somebody that I've been a big fan of in the past as this good goal scorer in limited minutes, kind of like that Daniel Sprong type of effect. In Carcone's case, he was somebody that for Arizona the last couple seasons had some success, especially last year. In 74 games, had 21 goals, 8 assists for 29 points, with just a goal-scoring machine out of nowhere. But just one season removed from being a 21 goal scorer, you can see this year in 3 games, he has 0 points, a -2, has been healthy scratched multiple times for this Utah team, and hasn't really found a role whatsoever now with the franchise in Utah. He's not the only one of that Utah team that has seen his production dip a bit. You've had Alexander Kerfoot only with 4 points to start out the year, Lawson Krause only 5 points too, but in Carcone's case, he is the most expendable out of those two, and especially with his cap hit at only $775K, he's pretty easily movable too. But this is somebody that I think a lot of teams would like to have in their bottom 6 as a sufficient goal scorer that just really hasn't been given the chance for Utah this year to be that type of guy. I mean, he's not even playing for them. He's not even in the lineup consistently, and I think he can be better for some other team. In Carcone's case, because that low cap hit, it doesn't need to be a super complicated trade. It could just be a 5th or 6th round pick going back to Utah. But I think the big reason why we haven't seen a trade yet is just because I think Utah wants to still try to make things work, but it just hasn't been working up to this point. There hasn't been a fit for him, and I think eventually there's going to be a natural parting ways here happening soon. Next, I'm going on to another player that I see as extremely likely to get dealt this year again is actually Matt Benning, who is a part of the Timothy Liljegren trade with the Toronto Maple Leafs. But even though we saw Toronto recently acquire him, we've already heard so much about Toronto potentially flipping Benning, which I think would make a lot of sense, given I don't think he is the solution to their defense that they might need as a depth defenseman. He makes $1.25 million, but he's somebody that has pretty majorly fallen off, I would say, since 2023, where he had a decent season, getting 24 points in 77 games. He was one of San Jose's better defensemen, which I know isn't saying a lot, but it is one of those facts that is nice to see. But since then, he had a pretty injured 2024, and then this year was just an awful start to him with San Jose, just playing so bad defensively, and that was a reason why I think he was shipped off in the end. I think we could see him maybe dealt for a stronger defenseman or something else, maybe a part of a bigger package in the future, but I don't think he has a long-term plan with the Leafs, and I think the Leafs are going to end up getting rid of him eventually. In the meantime, I think he could be an okay stopgap if there's injuries there, but I don't think he's an everyday player for the Leafs, and eventually, for a bigger trade down the line, he ends up getting dealt. Now, he's definitely not the last Leaf on this list. There's a few others I could have mentioned, but the other obvious choice on this list is Nick Robertson, who, to start out this season, has found himself again in a weird spot. He was one of the last RFAs to sign, and it really shows in the games that he's played so far. In 11 games, he has 1 goal for 1 point, and really hasn't been much of a factor. He was pretty good goal scoring wise in his limited role last year, getting 14 goals, 27 points, 56 games, but there were some pretty big defensive shortcomings, and I think that was a reason why he wasn't able to really sign long-term with the Leafs. There was a lot of controversy surrounding him in the offseason when he went out and talked about Keefe and his disdain for a situation with the Leafs and his lack of confidence in the future with Toronto, and even though he ultimately did end up signing, I mean, his role has been pretty minimal with the Leafs so far, and I would be pretty concerned about my future with the Leafs if I was Robertson as well. So even though he signed that tryout 1-year deal, it doesn't seem like it's going to be working out in the end, and I could easily see him being dealt maybe in the same trade as Matt Benning in the future. In fact, I could see him being in that similar mold as a Daniel Sprong, where he has some great moments, some good stretches, especially with the goal scoring, power play abilities, but might not be a fixture on your team for too long. And it seems like there's always an expiration date with how well Robertson is playing, and it seems like his time with the Leafs is up. Now, we've gone from a pair of Toronto Maple Leafs, but next up I want to talk about a pair of Montreal Canadiens who I could see being dealt this season. First, I want to talk about Joel Armia, who I think is the most likely out of the veterans, per se, to be dealt by the Habs soon. I would love to put Christian Dvorak in this spot, but honestly, I think he has been so bad, and his contract is about 600 to 700K more than Armia, that I just don't even see Dvorak even having a suitor out there that would want him. In Armia's case, I think he's a little bit more expendable and at least a little bit easier to move. He's 31 years old, $3.4 million, and last year, goal scoring wise, he got up to a pretty good level in 66 games, had 17 goals, 8 assists for 25 points. This year has just been a season from heck for him, though. In 12 games, is 1 goal, 3 assists, 4 points. Not the worst production in the world, but the defensive level has just taken a big decline. Last year, it was really the goal scoring and the overall work ethic that was strong with Armia. This year, it just hasn't been up to that level, and it seems like Armia just has kind of quit on the staff and the team around him right now. I think he can be valuable for a team, maybe putting him on the power play, and I think he will be better defensively once he's shipped somewhere else, but right now with the Habs, it just ain't working out. Now, for the second Montreal Canadian that I see pretty likely getting moved over the next stretch here is Arber Xhekaj, who I think the Habs want to make work. They want to see him be this great defenseman, but it seems like his relationship with Marty St. Louis specifically has been really strange this season. Marty St. Louis isn't one to get mad or be frustrated all that much, especially with the media, but he was pretty obviously frustrated talking about Xhekaj and his play up to this point about a week ago. And even though we've seen Xhekaj come into the lineup a couple times since then, I just feel like the Habs coaching staff and Marty St. Louis specifically just doesn't have the trust that they need in Xhekaj right now. St. Louis did say that he can be a good player, and at 23 years old, I mean, there's still a lot of room to grow there, but Xhekaj's results have never been incredible at the NHL level. It's always been because of these great moments and physical moments that Xhekaj has gotten the recognition that he's deserved. But in a lot of cases, he's somebody that I think is a lot more expendable than some people might end up wanting to admit. And so far, his play up to this season hasn't been really all that inspiring either. I think there's a lot of teams right now that could be looking to add some youth on their defense that has the edge physically that Xhekaj does bring. We'll see if that's something that ends up making the Habs keep him in the end, but it just feels like with how weird his deployment has been, Xhekaj might want out in the future. Though, of course, with his brother also in the organization, maybe that ends up changing things. Who knows? Now we move on to number 6, and this is another player that's on the younger side that isn't really getting much of a chance this season, and that's actually moving on to the Washington Capitals in Sonny Milano. Now, I don't know what the heck is wrong with elite prospects. I don't know what Lester B. Person M15D2 is. He's not on that team. He's on the Washington Capitals still somehow. But with how his deployment has been this season, it's kind of similar to Xhekaj. I don't know. What is wrong with elite prospects? Who knows? I don't think that's real. I think he's still in the NHL, but you could see the games that he has played. It's not a lot this season. In 2 games, he has 0 points, is a -3. He's been healthy scratched multiple times. I think he was healthy scratched 8 straight games this season, which compared to last year and the goal scoring we saw in 49 games, 15 goals, 23 points, is a pretty big surprise. But you're starting to notice a theme to this video so far, is that a lot of these guys in trade rumors, a lot of these guys that could end up being moved, scored a lot of goals in limited minutes last year, but haven't been able to replicate those minutes or replicate that value this season. Milano is just another player in that same line, but he's had a couple of really successful seasons for the Capitals in offensive roles, but this year it just hasn't come up to that level. I think this is a lot to do with the fact that the Caps improved their offensive depth by quite a bit this offseason. You got brought in wingers like Andrew Mangiapane, for instance, who are also filling that speedy goal-scoring role for the Caps that Milano previously held. The big thing that I think could prevent a move from happening is, for as inconsistent a player as Milano is, he has a multi-year deal, making $1.9 million for not just this year, but next. And I think that could withhold some teams from having actual trade interest in him. I think they could have interest in the player themselves, but I think that cap hit is just a little bit too much for a player that just has not been able to prove himself consistently for Washington. Now, I feel like a broken record right now. We're going to go on to another younger goal-scoring winger who just has not been able to find a fit this season. Next up, we're going to go to a guy that I haven't really talked about much on the channel, but I think is a pretty interesting NHLer in Alexei Toropchenko of the St. Louis Blues. He's somebody making $1.25 million, is kind of an interesting power forward in today's league. He was somebody that last year actually has done some pretty good things in the last couple of seasons. He got 19 points back in 69 games in 2023, and then last year played a full season, getting 21 points, 14 goals in 82 games. An interesting depth goal-scoring power forward. He's somebody, though, this year just been not able to go up to that level again. In 10 games, has 1 assist, 1 point, and has been okay for St. Louis, but nothing all that revolutionary. You can see with the size at 6'6", 223 pounds, with the goal scoring that he has been able to show already at the NHL level, I think there is a team out there that could get a 20 goal scorer if he's able to unlock that type of potential in him. I don't think he's gonna be much more than just this opportunistic scorer, but it's something I think a lot of teams, considering the size and considering some of the success already, would be pretty naturally interested in. But out of all the guys we talked about so far, I think Toropchenko has one of the most interesting profiles out of all of them, and I think especially for a lot of NHL GMs too, the interest would be there. Now we're actually going to go to a former St. Louis Blues Russian winger next up here. This is somebody that I think, considering San Jose's returning players here from injuries, is pretty likely to be moved, and that's Klim Kostin, and now of the San Jose Sharks. He has been all over the place over the last few years, going from St. Louis to Detroit to the Edmonton Oilers to the San Jose Sharks now after Detroit, and you can see last year he had a pretty good end of the season. 19 games, had 5 goals, 5 assists, 10 points for them, but this year has been just a nothing burger. I mean, in 7 games he has 0 goals, is a -4, but considering San Jose's health coming back in Macklin Celebrini especially, I think Kostin is just kind of in a weird spot with San Jose going forward. And this cap hit too at $2 million, considering he's also going to be an RFA after this season, I just don't really know if San Jose has him in the future plans whatsoever. He's such a strange player though, right? I mean, there's sometimes when the offense is there and you have that combination of physicality and the traits that he has with those and how he's able to use it, and sometimes it all comes together, but then you'll have a start like this and you'll wonder where that player even went, what happened to him. And I think that's something of a reason why we've seen him flown all over the place, because he's never really been able to find that consistency. At $2 million, that's a reason why he was shipped off to the Sharks in the first place, was because of that cap hit. So we'll see if any other teams are willing to bite. But I think Kostin is somebody that has the potential to be an NHLer, but just hasn't been able to realize that on a year-to-year basis. With San Jose, it doesn't seem like that's going to happen again. Next up, we're going to go on to number 9, and one of the few defensemen I'm going to talk about on this list, but another Russian here, and somebody that I could see absolutely getting moved in the future, and that is Igor Zamula, who I think is a really interesting project. At 24 years old, 6'3", 176 pounds, he's somebody that I think last year was pretty underrated with how he played. In 66 games, had 5 goals, 16 assists, 21 points, was above a plus for Philly, which I think is always a success for a younger D. But you could see this season, it's not been good. In 8 games, he has 2 assists for 2 points, but is a -10, and defensively has just taken some major steps back, which hasn't been too much of a anomaly on Philadelphia. You've seen that happen quite a bit throughout this year, but Zamula is maybe the most extreme example. But there's a lot of teams out there looking for some physicality on defense. I mean, you have a team like the Montreal Canadiens who would be looking for a defenseman. I think they'd want to go for a right D if they were to go for somebody, but Zamula is somebody that I think would have a lot of interest around the league, considering his youth, considering what he showed last year. Maybe a lot of teams are looking at this and looking at it as an anomaly to start to the season, which it could very well be. But considering his age and not even turning 25 until next March, I think there's a lot of teams out there that can see the rawness, some of the potential defensively there, and want to go after a player like that. We'll see what ends up happening, but I think Philly could be standing to make a lot of moves over the next year. We'll see the direction they end up taking if Zamula is a part of that direction, but I would bet no. Now we're going to go on to the last player to talk about here that I could see being moved in the next little bit. And this is one that is kind of interesting to talk about considering how successful he was last year. And he might honestly be the most interesting player on this list. And that is Philipp Kurashev of the Chicago Blackhawks, who has had a topsy-turvy last couple of years. You can see last season in 75 games going from 25 points to 54 points in Connor Bedard's rookie season, playing right with him and getting some pretty major success. But this year, that success has been few and far between, and you can see to start out in 12 games, he has 2 goals, 1 assist for 3 points, a -8, and has been really just irrelevant throughout a lot of this season, especially to start out the year in the first few games was just a complete non-factor. But as you can see, most of his time on ice this season has actually been playing with Hall and Bertuzzi, not Connor Bedard. He's had a couple other lines he's been a part of, most recently this Bedard, Kurashev, Donato line, which looks to be working now. But you could see the start of the season with Hall and Bertuzzi just was not working whatsoever. Things have turned around a little bit since that line with Bedard and Donato has formed, but even though he has 2 points in his last 4 games, it just doesn't seem like Kurashev is going to be a long-term piece for the Blackhawks, considering his need really with Bedard to thrive. He can be a decent winger for him, but I don't think as a long-term piece, and I could easily see Chicago kind of just letting him go eventually, especially if he's going to be asking for higher cap hits. And that's really the big thing right now, making $2.25 million. And especially with Kurashev being an RFA after this year, if this lack of fit continues to happen, then I could easily see Chicago just kind of letting him go in the end. I mean, it's something that Chicago is not afraid to do. They did it with Dylan Strome, most notably a few years back, and that is biting them in the butt for sure right now. But they're not afraid to make these risky moves with their RFAs and not keep them if they don't see them as future long-term pieces. And Kurashev, I could see fitting into one of those situations. And if Chicago wants to avoid that, a trade might be in the works to maybe get somebody different in the end. And hey, maybe they put him with Bedard over the next couple months and the production increases and that automatically increases Kurashev's trade value out there and they end up getting rid of him then. That to me, I think would be the wise move for the Blackhawks if they are willing to get rid of Kurashev eventually. Build up his trade value now so you can benefit in the future. But those are my trade candidates before the NHL trade deadline this year. The guys I see being the most likely to get dealt over the next couple months. And let me know your thoughts down below on them. Do you guys agree? Do you disagree? And who do you think is the most likely player to get dealt soon as we see a transition period in the NHL? Of course, make sure you hit that like button, that subscribe button, and the notification bell for more hockey content just like this, and helps the channel out a ton when you guys do as well. Sign up to BetUS today as well, and of course, click on this card for all of my trade content right in one playlist. My name is Nathan, and I will see you guys in the next one. Have a fantastic hockey day, and goodbye.